The Abbey. The abbey was as humble as the monks who lived there. The only structure was a long wooden building with a thatched grass roof that sloped into the hill behind it. Built of hand-hewn timber and plugged with small rocks and straw, it served as church, home, storage shed, and shelter in the winter for livestock. To one side, a garden was dug into what had been fallow land. Rocks cleared before planting lay 2 and 3 high around it, with small cairns of stacked stones marking the corners. Even this late in the autumn, several tubers and vegetables still awaited harvest in the shortening days. Gourds and pumpkins, as well as turnips, leeks, and carrots, kept well in the cool earth once harvested. The monks raised foods strange to most in Britain, like carrots and beans. While they maintained a low presence in this divided land, the monks often sent 1 or 2 of their own abroad to Gaul and beyond. One monk had just recently returned and brought with him several small brown tubers sprouting leaves with purple blooms. He told them Merlyn had given this plant to the French one time when he had returned from the future. The French called these pommes de terre, potatoes in English. When boiled, the tuber yielded a bland mush, somewhat like the radish when mashed. Flavored with leeks or topped with the rare bit of cream or butter, the potatoes were pleasing to the palate. The monks had few visitors. Cadbury Castle, the closest village, was an afternoon's ride away. During the short winter days, a trip to the castle meant an overnight stay. Their days were spent tending the gardens and raising goats and chickens. They made simple tools for working the land, such as hoes and rakes fashioned from oak branches. The monks mended their own clothing and only traded for new clothes when garments wore out. Prayers were saved for the early morning hours and evenings before bed. The 2 youngest members of the abbey received the more physical chores like gathering firewood to store for the upcoming winter. They could be seen struggling at times under the heavy loads they carried, or pulled into the yard from the apple orchards. These they stacked under a small lean-to on the southern side of the building. In the warm autumn days, the monks would press the small sour crab apples into ciders or wines. These they traded with the castle for food and clothing, and sold to passing travelers. They served the larger sweet apples with their meals. An elderly man, his brown robe frayed at the bottom, appeared in the doorway, his grey-topped head cocked, brown eyes taking in the activity of the yard with a quick glance. Friar Thomas led the monks at Glastonbury Abbey, situated at the foot of the Tor. One of the few places in the land high enough to see long distances in all directions. He, along with the other monks, was the guardian of this strategic spot. Thomas moved into the yard. Just a second. Thomas moved into the Thomas moved into the yard and stood there, silent and still, listening. Something had disturbed his concentration. The sudden pounding of horses' hooves broke through the whispers drifting through the pines, shattering the mellow mood of the afternoon like a million stones cascading down a mountainside, disrupt the calm waters of a secluded pond. Guinevere and Cedwyn burst from the fruit orchards like arrows shot from a bow. Hauling back on the reins, they stopped the horses just short of the monks, the 2 boys among them, who had gathered at the commotion. A cloud of dust from their abrupt arrival rose, covering them all in a layer of dirt. Spitting out dirt, the 2 boys jumped forward at the silent motion of Thomas' hand to grab the reins to prevent the horses from bolting. Guinevere and Cedwyn looked as if they had been caught up in a violent whirlwind. Twigs and leaves stuck in their hair and clothes, as if they had been attacked by a group of mad trees. Cedwyn pulled part of a branch out of his sleeve. Guinevere had a scratch down her left cheek, causing her to wince when she brushed it as she combed leaves from her hair with trembling fingers. Both horses, white streaks of sweat lathering their coats, stood on shaky legs as they sucked in air and snorted through their noses. The riders slid from their mounts with breathless words of thanks. The boys, one around Guinevere's age and the other younger than Cedwyn, led the horses away. Guinevere was relieved to see them walking the animals to cool them slowly. However, she noticed the boys stayed within earshot, curious to hear what happened. Once the horses were breathing normally, the monks let them in with the goats, where they gulped water from a trough, streams of liquid leaking from their lips. Friar Thomas approached Guinevere and Cedwyn, his forehead wrinkled in dismay at their appearance and haste. "Lady Guinevere, Master Cedwyn, whatever has happened? Is there trouble at the castle? What are you doing so far from home? You look as if the devil himself is after you. Have your fathers returned from the north?" Guinevere and Cedwyn narrowed, and a frown furrowed his weathered face. He folded work his chest and looked from one to the other. "On, out with it. What have you two been up to now?" "We rode to the wizard stones," Guinevere said, her voice muffled as she bowed her head, fearful of the abbot's wrath. "To see the magic of Alban Elfred," Cedwyn added, his head bowed also. "Am I to understand that Brynwyn just let you two leave the castle for a romp on the plains? She didn't see fit to send guards with you."
No, sir,"
Cedwyn said. He tried to meet Thomas' gaze and failed.
"But,"
Cedwyn started to explain, "so you two just hide off to see some pagan magic that conjurer, that necromancer Merlyn is always filling your heads with? To investigate some infernal superstition around the autumnal equinox?"
"Merlyn's a great wizard,"
Guinevere said, her voice quaking under his cold stare. She had never seen the abbot so upset. Thomas grunted. "So no one knows where you are, is this correct?"
"Yes, sir,"
Cedwyn said. He quailed before Thomas' anger, squirming and fidgeting, wishing they were any place but here. Thomas raised his eyes and arms to the sky. His lips moved, but no sound reached Guinevere and Cedwyn. He nodded to the two people who'd helped the children off their horses. "Samuel, Aaron, take the Lady Guinevere and the Master Cedwyn into our humble house. Fetch water so they can refresh themselves. Help tend to their wounds." He looked back at Guinevere and Cedwyn.
"Wait,"
Cedwyn said. Thomas clenched his hands together, quite possibly to avoid strangling his two young guests.
"There was magic at the stones,"
Guinevere said.
"A goddess appeared and warned us of danger. Then we heard an awful cry, and our horses spooked. It sounded like a man screaming as if being tortured,"
Cedwyn said.
"Then there was silence."
A long minute went by before Thomas spoke. "Go inside, clean up. We'll speak of this after."
"But,"
Guinevere started to protest. "We'll talk later," Thomas said through clenched jaws. Then he spun on his heels and Cedwyn's wrath. A large wooden table surrounded by stools stood in the center of the room. Across the room, a door on the far side led back outside, and it was through here they were taken. Just to the side of the door stood buckets full of water. Aaron already held a wet cloth. He motioned to Cedwyn to come forward. He lowered his eyes when he turned to answer.
"Samuel, we've known each other for as long as you've lived here. You've never called me lady before. I know, Lady Guinevere,"
Samuel said,
"but you're going to be my queen. That may be one."
"For goodness sake," Aaron said, "just tell us if you really saw a goddess." Finished helping Cedwyn, Aaron now stood in front of his older brother. Doorway. "Come inside, please," Friar Thomas said. Gwyneth, Samuel, and Aaron hung back at the threshold. Without turning around, Thomas said, "Samuel, Aaron, you also. We can't have you listening at the door. Bad manners." The boys scrambled in, crowding the table with Samuel next to Guinevere and Aaron across the table next to Cedwyn. Thomas sat at the head position. Clearing his throat, Thomas looked them in the eye. "I have no doubt you heard something. However," he paused, folding his hands on the table, and then continued, "it was not a man you heard." Cedwyn started to object, but Thomas held up a hand. "I know it sounded just like that. We've heard the same cry several times, and have investigated."
"What did you find?"
Guinevere asked. "The fighting and the fires have disturbed more than humans. The animals and birds are also unsettled. Natural hunting patterns have been forgotten, as prey and those who prey are driven out of their territories or killed. Creatures of the night, like the screech owls, now frequent the afternoon hours for dinner, searching for dinner."
"You think we heard an owl?"
Guinevere asked. "I'm sure of it, Lady Guinevere. When one doesn't realize what it is they are hearing, it conjures up many frightful images in one's mind. We experienced the same fear before uncovering the real source." He stood and made the sign of the cross on his chest. "I fear before the fate of this land is decided, many other fears and terrors will be known. As soon as your mounts have recovered from the dash here, you're to be on your way to Cadbury. Samuel and Aaron will ride with you to make sure there are no deviations or side trips." The brothers' faces lit up at this welcome surprise. "Professor Rhymes has requested you come for more Latin lessons." Guinevere allowed herself a secret smile as frowns replaced the boys' grins when the import of the abbot's words sank in.
"But what about the goddess and her warnings?"
Cedwyn asked. "Ah, yes, the goddess. I nearly forgot." A slight smile appeared for a brief moment on Thomas' otherwise stern face. He resumed his seat. "Tell me about this goddess."
"She appeared out of a cloud in the middle of the stones,"
Guinevere said.
"as the sun was straight above us,"
Cedwyn added. "I see. And you say she spoke to you?" Thomas asked.
"Yes,
"You said Mr. Cedwyn." In a solemn voice, Cedwyn repeated the words of the goddess.
"You have come seeking the awakening, which you call the magic of Alban Elfed, and wish to know when the battles will end and peace once again reign in this land. Even I do not know that, for Arthur follows a path made by another. I bring you only my magic. Many trials await the two of you. Perhaps the hardest are the ones you will each have to endure alone. You, Guinevere, will find yourself lost. You who are destined to be a great queen will have to traverse a journey of immense pain and self-doubt. You must let your inner feelings guide you on this journey. The journey will be hard and painful. You must summon the courage of your very soul to sustain you. You, Cedwyn, faithful friend of the princess and the queen, your journey may be the hardest of all. You will be sent far from those you serve and love. Your duty will demand you see this most difficult journey to its end. Whether it be death or life for you will depend on many things. Your courage must come from deep within your soul, even for one so young. Your love of family and friends must be great, but greater still must be your loyalty to the knight's duty, for your knight's vow comes soon. You must embrace it. You must defeat the temptations to turn aside for your own safety. Each of you will have to trust the other implicitly, without reservation, without doubt. To do otherwise will destroy both of you and this land. I give each of you my blessing. You must be ready to flee, for danger approaches."
The four sat in stunned silence as Cedwyn finished. Guinevere's eyes widened, and a nod at Cedwyn conveyed her wonder and approval. Thomas didn't say anything at first, his brow deeply creased, his hands clasped together so tight even a captured gnat would be unable to find an escape. "Go now and check the horses. Samuel and Aaron, you pack a roll for a couple of nights at the castle. We'll speak of this again before you leave." Thomas stood, signaling the end of the conversation. The stern set of his face discouraged any further comment. Quietly, Guinevere and Cedwyn stood as Thomas turned and walked to the door. Once Samuel and Aaron left, they looked at each other.
"Didn't sound like no owl to me,"
Cedwyn muttered.
"Me either,"
Guinevere said.
"but it is hard to doubt him when they've heard the same sound many times. But why did the horses spook?" "I imagine for the same reason we did,"
she said, following Samuel and Aaron. At the small enclosure, they grabbed rough cloths and rubbed the horses down, their coats still white with streaks of drying sweat.
"Thomas didn't believe us about the goddess, did he?"
Cedwyn asked. His voice sounded like it came from his mount, because the top of his head only came to the horses' withers.
"I don't know."
Guinevere came and stood in front of the horses.
"How did you remember all of it?" "I'm not sure. When Thomas asked, the words just filled my head."
He stared past the abbey through the orchard, and beyond the stone circle he couldn't see.
"Do you think it was her? I mean, do you think she made me remember without me knowing it?" "I don't know, but I do know the fear we felt was real."
Cedwyn didn't reply, his gaze resting on the tor above the abbey. The haze, which obscured the tor from the plains, now sat just below it. A light fall breeze gradually cleared out the smoke.
"Should we?"
Cedwyn cocked his head and nodded at the tor. Guinevere hesitated only a moment.
"Yes, it's only a short climb if we go straight up."
Leaving the cloths on the rails, they let Samuel know where they were going. Knowing their time was short, they half ran, half walked to the other side of the abbey and started the uphill climb to the path leading to the tor's summit. It wasn't a long climb, but the steepness left them breathless and wheezing at the top. Hands on their knees catching their breath, it took several minutes before either spoke. Cedwyn recovered first and walked around the summit's edges. Steeped in magic, it was said the tour allowed viewers to see all the way south to St. Michael's Mound at the Land's End, and north to Roman Wall on a clear day.
"It's still hazy further out west, Guinevere, but there's the plains,"
he said, pointing to the west.
"That's where we rode from where the wizard stones sit." "Where we heard the cry."
Guinevere shivered.
"If this wind would just blow a bit more, we might even see a rider from the north."
"Mayhap," Guinevere said, her voice low.
"They would have sent word by now if the battles were turning against them, don't you think?" "If they could." "A single rider would have gotten through, Guinevere. I know our dads and Arthur are alive. My mum said she would know. She would feel it here."
Cedwyn touched his heart like his mother did when she spoke of the ongoing battles that had all but depleted the castle of men and boys of fighting age. He watched as she brushed away a single tear. He patted her arm, his heart aching for his friend, his queen. His hand tightened, making Guinevere wince.
"Look!"
He pointed to a small blur just beyond the orchard.